If you're currently running a business, you'll know just how critical it is to be able to deliver a message in a way that resonates with people and inspires them to take action. Well, in this video, I caught up with Andrea Piccini, who's a professional public speaking coach and the founder of Ideas on Stage in the UK. Ideas on Stage have worked with hundreds of clients from Microsoft to Lacoste to over 300 TEDx speakers to really help them craft and create a powerful message that resonates with their audience and inspires them to take action. We also dive into how you can start using digital platforms in these times of quarantine and isolation right now to still be delivering a message that's powerful and that resonates with people. Everything from doing online presentations to even things like having webinars or video calls with your potential customers. So if you're somebody who's looking to have an impact in the world or just looking to grow your business and take it to new heights, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this one. Hey guys, it's Tom here from Elevate Digital, and today I'm joined by Andrea from Ideas on Stage. Andrea is a presentation and public speaking coach who helps business professionals really share their message, articulate their message, and deliver it in a very memorable way. So Andrea, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Thank you. All right, so the way me and Andrea first met actually was at a talk he did on public speaking. And one of the things that's really interesting about this, and especially with everything that's going on right now, obviously a lot of things are shifting over to virtual. And what I really liked about some of the things Andrea was talking about and delivered in his presentation is that they're very, very applicable to any type of content, any kind of marketing, and any kind of messages that we share, whether that be in person or in a virtual environment. So first thing I wanted to start with, there was something that Andrea said in this talk that really, really hit me. And I'd love for you to dive into this a bit deeper, Andrea. And one of the things you were talking about was sharing or focusing more on the transformation as opposed to the information that you're giving people. And I'd love if you could just to kind of dive into that and what that means really.
Sure, yeah. But the reason why I talked about that particular aspect in that talk, Tom, is because I think that and of course I focus on presentations. You say that this is applicable to many other areas, and I'm glad to hear that. But when it comes to presentations, too many presentations aim only to inform. So we think that one of our the objective when we give a presentation is to inform our audience, just to share some information. The problem with that is that if you look at how our brain works, we forget most of what we hear within just 30 seconds. That's how our brain works. So if you want people to remember information, that's fine. I'm not saying that that cannot be your objective. But if that's your only objective, then there is no need to give a presentation. Just give them a document, give them a coffee, give them some time so that they can drink their coffee and read your document, and then you share some ideas, you answer their questions. It's much better, isn't it? Mm. Presentations are very bad at informing people, but they're great at transforming them. As a presenter, you want to transform your audience. You want to change your audience in some way. Remember this, Tom, and also for our listeners. Say you need to give a presentation. If after your presentation, your audience doesn't believe, feel, or do anything new or different, believe, feel, or do, especially do anything new or different, then you've wasted your time. And even worse, you've wasted theirs. So that's what I mean by transformation. And I can give you an example if you want, but I don't want to lead to anything else.
No, I love that. And I think it's interesting because like you said, it's not always applicable to virtual and digital platforms. You know, you have things like blogs, which are sometimes simply there to inform, right? And it's just like an instructional manual almost. But I think, you know, and especially in like the world of marketing as well, right? When businesses want to really have an impact on their audience and be memorable, you do need to look beyond that kind of informational transaction, so to speak. So yeah, it'd be amazing if you could to kind of dive in some examples and like how that actually looks, like how someone can kind of go about doing that.
Sure. Well, for example, the first that came to my mind is Steve Jobs. Right? I think everybody talks about Steve Jobs, of course, but I think it's fair to say that he was one of the best, if not the best, business presenter, especially when it came to product launches ever. And if you remember when he launched the first iPhone in 2007, if you think about it, that was a great product launch, great presentation, but he wasn't aiming at informing us. He didn't want us to remember how many pixels the screen had or how fast the processor was. He wanted us to buy it. He wanted us to desire it. He wanted journalists in the audience to write really positive articles about it. Because if we could remember all that technical information, but nobody wanted to buy it, nobody wanted to write positive articles about it, he would have failed. So that's what I mean. His objective was not just to share some information. He wanted to create that transformation in the audience. And that's what we need to do. And really, for you, for our listeners, there is a key question that you need to ask yourself before you start preparing your presentations. And the question is, well, actually, it's not even a question. You need to complete this sentence. When we work with a client, we always force them to think about this sentence. And the sentence is, after this presentation, my audience will what? Think about it. What will they believe differently? What will they feel differently? What will they do differently? And that becomes your transformational objective. And I can promise you, Tom, if that's what you do when you prepare your presentation, so forget about PowerPoint at this stage, start with the audience, think about your objective. Then, when you do start thinking about your key messages, those messages will be less focused on what the audience needs to know, which is that sharing of information, which is not the main objective. Those key messages will be much more focused on what they need to believe, what they need to feel, and what they need to do, which is exactly your objective when you present.
I love that. That's so powerful. It's such a powerful question to ask, isn't it? Like before anything, and it's very easy to forget. You know, I often overlook it myself. You know, you create a piece of content, but you don't really think about, okay, what do I actually want people to get from this? And I guess it comes down to, like, you know, the old saying was starting with the end in mind, right? Like, where do you actually want to take people? So yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So what about, what are some of the kind of common missteps that people make then when it comes to delivering or having that kind of goal in mind? Like, where do you see people often kind of tripping over with that?
Yeah. There are so many, so you need to stop me at a certain point because I can go on for hours. I can give you just the first thing that comes to my mind.
Give me the first three.
Yeah. So the first one is that, so especially with business professionals, when it comes to business presentations, we tend to start by either just opening PowerPoint and putting together some slides, or by thinking about our key messages, what we want to communicate, which is definitely better than just opening the presentation tool. I say PowerPoint, it could be any other tool, sure. But it's not the very first thing you want to do. The first mistake I see is that when we give a presentation, we think that it's our presentation. It's not our presentation. It's always you said you need to start with the end. I would also say yes, and we also need to start with the audience. When you give a presentation, it's their presentation, not yours. It's always the audience's presentation. Think of a presentation, Tom, as a present. If I want to give you a present, it's your present, not mine. So I need to make sure that I know you so that I can buy something that you like. A presentation is very similar. When you give people a presentation, it's their presentation, not yours. And so you need to make sure that you know your audience, definitely before you open PowerPoint, but also before you start thinking about your key messages. your messages depend on the audience. So that's the first, and later if you want, I can tell you how you can understand your audience before you start preparing your presentations. But that's the first mistake. Another mistake is that, and please Tom, stop me if I speak too much, yeah?
Sure, no, this is super valuable, so please.
Okay, so another mistake is that we tend to rely on technology too much. There's an actor, John Cleese, I don't know if you know John Cleese, yeah. And John Cleese says, and I agree with him 100%, he says, look, we don't know where we get our ideas from, but what we do know is that we don't get them from our laptops. So if you want to be creative from a content perspective, and then later on also from a design perspective, say if you want to use some slides to reinforce your message, then that has nothing to do with PowerPoint. It has nothing to do with technology. So you need to forget the technology, which means that you need to plan analog. It could be just use pen and paper or a whiteboard or a flip chart. You could use Post-it notes. If you want to be creative, that makes a massive difference in the experience of the audience eventually. That's another thing. I'm happy to go on, but you tell me, Tom.
Yeah, let's have one more if you've got one more.
Okay, the other thing is, the other mistake maybe from a public speaking perspective, from a delivery perspective, is that people fail to prepare, to rehearse. Now, to use an analogy, let's think about motor racing. Now, in motor racing, it's not because you have the fastest car that you're going to win the race. The performance of the driver is just as important. Now, in public speaking, say, for example, that you have a compelling message, great content. Maybe you've also illustrated that content with highly effective visuals. So you've got everything you need. You may be tempted to say that you're now ready to get up in front of your audience and share your ideas. Maybe you are, maybe not. Like in motor racing, in public speaking, the performance of the presenter is just as important. And that means that whether you are an improviser or a learner, because there are two types of speakers, I would always encourage you to rehearse a number of times. And I see that people don't do that enough, which doesn't mean that you need to repeat the same things and memorize it. It really depends on what makes you more comfortable, but preparation is super important.
Yeah, awesome. I'd love to, something you just said there, I'd love to dive into that a bit more about the improviser and the rehearser, because I think I've seen that, you know, a few clients that we've worked with, when they're talking about like doing video content or any form of content, a lot of it comes down to, well, should I have a script? Should I rehearse it? And it's a really interesting question, because you do see some people who are just incredible at, you know, just talking on the spot, whereas others really struggle. So how, you know, let's say, for example, somebody, and especially with the time zone right now, is going to do a virtual presentation, right? They're going to host a webinar. How would they know for themselves the best way to prepare for that? Like, how do you kind of decide on which route to go with?
Yeah. Now, a couple of things there, because you mentioned learners and improvisers and then the virtual communication. So I can address both points. The first one, yeah, based on experience, I see that there are two types of speakers. You have those for whom the very idea of getting up in front of an audience, or maybe delivering online, because for the time being, that's what we need to do. Yeah. But the very idea of being in front of an audience, whether offline or online, without knowing exactly what to say and when, makes them feel very stressed. So they need to have a script. They need to know exactly what to say and when. And we call them the learners. They need to learn. And then you have the improvisers, and they prefer to have more freedom, either on stage or in an online presentation. And there is no right or wrong approach. There is only the approach that works for you. And by the way, it's a spectrum. It's not that you are either a learner or an improviser. For example, I'm more towards the learner. I don't know about you, Tom.
I think I'm going, I don't know, I'm probably more towards the improviser, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there is no right or wrong approach. This is the approach that works for you. But especially for improvisers, I would always encourage you to rehearse a number of times. And it doesn't matter if what you say is different each time you rehearse. That's okay. I'm not asking you to memorize, but I can promise you, it will still be more powerful the 5th time you rehearse than the 1st.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. In terms of preparation for an online presentation, the key thing is that when we work with our clients, we always try to make sure that they can practice in a setting which is as close as possible to the actual situation. Now, in a face-to-face presentation, that's sometimes a bit more difficult because, say, for example, you need to prepare for a TED Talk. It's a bit more difficult to replicate the environment for the speaker. But actually, we have an advantage now because in an online presentation, you have all you need. So, for example, if I'm doing a webinar tomorrow, and all I need to do is to maybe rehearse my presentation, my webinar, once, twice, 3 times, depending on what works for you, pretending that I'm there. So, for example, if I'm using Zoom, then this is my recommendation for people. If you do a webinar on Zoom, then launch your Zoom platform, then rehearse, go through your content with the slides, with Zoom. If you say, for example, if you know that you, at a certain point during your webinar, you want to ask a question, then ask the question and pretend that somebody gives an answer. You know, you need to, whether it's offline or online, you need to try and practice in a setting, in an environment which is as close as possible to the actual environment that you're going to face. For example, just the last one. Now, if you want to make sure that in virtual communication, now you want to make sure that your posture, your body is, and your face is positioned in a certain way. Like, for example, maybe like you are today, like I am today. But for me to have this view, I need to have some books. I've got some books here. You could have some books, or you could have like a more professional setting. And so if you rehearse your presentation, then do it with your books, or, you know, do it with that frame that you have in the camera window. To be as close as possible to the actual environment.
Yeah, I find that quite interesting, actually. I noticed, and I don't know if this is intentional, but the way you are positioned in front of the camera right now, so that I can get more of your body language. I can see your arms and your gestures as well. Is that intentional to kind of have that more expressive?
Yeah, it is. You see, and this is very much connected to, sometimes they ask me, because I'm a presentation coach, a public speaking coach, and especially in the last few weeks, the question is always, okay, does this apply to online presentations as well? Because that's what we have to do now.
Sure.
And here is the thing. Yes, well, 99% of what we talked about, what we talk about when we talk about effective presentations apply just as well. Of course, then from an application perspective, there are some differences. For example, from a delivery perspective, the way you make good, you need to make good eye contact if you want to make a good connection with the audience. Now, the way you make good eye contact in a face-to-face presentation is different from the way you make good eye contact in virtual communication. But the same is true with gestures and the way you move your hands. The way you do it effectively is different, whether it's online or offline. But the principle, making good eye contact or using gestures, is the same. You need to do it. But the technicality is different.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I quite struggle with, actually, especially on like Zoom calls and things, and I notice you're quite good at this, but it's looking at the camera when you're talking instead of like, because it's easy enough to do it when you're recording a video and you're not talking to someone, but when you're doing a Zoom call, you kind of look at yourself and then you look at the person you're talking to.
It's true. It's so true. And that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah.
That's how you make good eye contact in an online presentation or in a conversation like this. Now, for me, my comfortable default would be this. Now, for example, Tom, I'm looking at you.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Now I'm looking at you. For me, this is very comfortable.
Yeah.
But actually, good eye contact means that I need to look not at you, but at the lens, at the camera. That's it. That's where my audience is.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I was talking about before. In a face-to-face presentation, it's different. You don't want to just look at one person.
Sure.
But that's how you make good eye contact, which to me, it's a bit uncomfortable because I'm not looking at you.
Yeah.
But you think that I'm looking at you, and the same is true for our listeners.
Yeah. It makes a huge difference, and it's really noticeable as well, because like you say, I think it's very common when you are on Zoom calls, everyone's typically looking down, and it can feel quite cold almost as a result, right?
Yeah. And it takes practice. What you can do, for example, if people want to have a tip, what I do all the time is when I'm running my own sessions, my own webinars, then I move my selfie window, so the camera where I can look at myself, I move it right at the top of the screen next to the camera.
Yeah.
So that when I'm looking at me, which is comfortable, isn't it? Or maybe as somebody else, depending on who the active speaker is, then it's as for the audience, it's as if I'm looking at them.
Clever. I like that. Nice tip.
Whereas if you have yourself or the active speaker maybe below, on the right, on the left, every time you look at them or yourself, it's a bit strange.
Yeah. Awesome. Andrea, one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you was, and I noticed this when I was on a webinar the other day, one of the things you talked about in the presentation that I came to was slides. As people are giving a presentation or giving a talk, again, whether that be on Zoom or in person or any other kind of webinar platform. This particular webinar I was watching, there was so much information on these slides, and you were talking into kind of the effect that has on people. Could you dive into that a bit for us and just kind of?
Sure. No, great question. That's one of the biggest problems we see all the time, the typical death by PowerPoint, where you have lots of text on the screen and bullet points. And the problem with that is, it's not that I don't like it. I don't like it, but that's not a problem. The problem is that, again, if you look at how our brain works, I'm fascinated, Tom, by how our brain works and what certain things mean when it comes to effective communication. And if you look at how our brain works, then the written text, and this is demonstrated by research, the written text is processed in exactly the same part of the brain that processes the spoken text. So if, as a presenter, if I show you or a group of people a slide full of text, then you either read the text or listen to me. You can't do both activities at the same time. It's demonstrated by research. So that's why the approach that I recommend to presentation design is an approach that's very simple, visual. It could be just a big image, and just think about billboards. Now, we live in London, right? You live in London as well, right, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we think about Piccadilly Circus, or maybe on the tube, you have these big billboards. Now, often, if they are well designed, they are very, very visual. Isn't that true? It's just a big image, maybe just a few words.
Yeah.
The reason why they do it is because they need to capture our attention in just a few seconds.
Yeah.
Now, who says that the same principle shouldn't apply when it comes to presentation design? You also want to capture people's attention in just a few seconds, so that then they can focus right back on you as the presenter. So consider this as a guideline. We call it the 5-second rule, or it could be the 3-second rule, depending on how flexible we want to be. But if you are presenting using the slides, and you don't have to do that all the time, but when you do, then each slide should be, and this is the same is true in an online presentation. Now I'm using this, assuming that I have a screen, because I'm used to giving face-to-face presentations, but the same principle applies to in vitro communication. Each slide should be so simple, so intuitive that your audience should be able to understand the message behind it in just 3 to 5 seconds. If that happens, then your slides are effective from a design perspective, and therefore from a communication perspective as well. Things are connected. If that doesn't happen, then most likely you are also suffering from death by PowerPoint. And with your audience, your audience is suffering too, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Awesome. Andrea, one of the things I've noticed about you is that you're very, very intentional with you know, how you come across and messages you deliver. How can, and this is something, and you know, I'm sure if there's other what's the word, what did we call it a minute ago? You got the researchers and the improvisers. If there is other improvisers out there, one of the things I certainly find is that it's all well and good being an improviser, but a lot of the time my messages aren't intentional and I can waffle. What are some tips you have to becoming very intentional when you're delivering a message?
Yeah, there's only one tip, Tom, which is preparation. Preparation. Now, I don't have any problems in saying that I have prepared for this interview. So, and I do it all the time, whether I'm interviewing some, for example, today, I am going to interview one person after this, and then after the other interview, I'm being interviewed by somebody else. So today is my interview day, and it takes preparation. So what I've done, I've also looked at, well, I know you because you've attended one of my events and we had a conversation, but I had a look again at your LinkedIn profile. I said before that you need to start with the audience.
Yeah.
Now, the same is true in a conversation like this. I try to understand as much as possible about you, and I try to think about, okay, what questions could be relevant to him. Maybe he will ask me this kind of question. Okay, if he asks me this question, how am I going to answer? Which again, doesn't mean that you need to have a script. I don't have a script. You don't need to memorize if that doesn't make you feel comfortable. But you need to prepare. Yeah. You need to know what to say and when. There is one of the best communicators out there I know at the time is, do you know Neil deGrasse Tyson?
No.
Okay, he's a scientist. Okay. He's an astrophysicist, so very technical, but he's a great communicator. And he's being interviewed all the time, podcasts, and he also says that he does a huge amount of preparation for every interview. And we're talking about interviews now. The same thing applies to any form of communication, presentations. But the only tip I have to be intentional, going back to your question, is to be prepared, to know what you're talking about. And yeah, again, to practice it and then to do it over and over again.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. One of the kind of breakthrough realizations I had when you were giving that talk was, I think, being an improviser, it's very easy to be put off by the idea of planning or rehearsing or whatever. But, you know, what you said, and you've said it in this conversation as well, it doesn't have to mean it's scripted. You can still improvise all you want, but it's just about, like you say, doing that initial research, which, yeah, I think is really, really interesting. And it's something that, you know, we often tell our customers as well, in terms of looking at the customer avatar, right, and having that in mind. And one of the things that we sometimes talk about is even if it takes pinning, you know, a picture of a customer avatar on your desk, you know, so you've got that. So whenever you're writing any kind of marketing message, or even if you're doing a video, you know, because it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? And especially like if, for example, you're doing a video for LinkedIn or Facebook or any other platform, because you can't see the audience, it's very easy to forget about them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great.
And I'm sure because you are in marketing, what you suggest that your clients do is to, when you work on their avatar, you even give it a name, right?
Yeah.
I know the marketing people.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Like a real person, because it makes it become more real.
Exactly.
Isn't it? Like it's then an actual person, as opposed to just being some bullet points and stuff.
And you see, you're right. You started this conversation by saying that many of the principles apply just as well in many other contexts. And here what we're talking about is that we need to start with the audience, which is very true in presentations. And I'm learning now that it's the same thing in marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to one of the points I wanted to finish on, Andrea, was in terms of one tip that you have that can really kind of help people with everything that's going on right now. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of virtual communication going on. Businesses and business owners are going to be looking to try and market themselves online. And I think one of the key things that people will need to do to stand out amongst all the noise in this time is to, like you said earlier, to be memorable. What's one kind of like suggestion, and I know there's probably plenty, but what's one suggestion that you could give somebody to kind of be memorable, become memorable, you know, with whatever kind of communications they're doing online?
Sure. Now, if you want to be memorable, if you want people to remember what you're talking about, then there are a number of things you can do. Now, perhaps in the interest of time, I've got definitely one idea, maybe even two. Now, the most important thing in effective communication, effective presenting, is storytelling. I'm sure everybody's heard it many times for good reason. Storytelling, telling stories, communicating through stories is one of the most powerful things you can do. People remember stories much more than facts and figures.
Yeah.
So every time, and this could be in a presentation, it could be in an interview, in any kind of form of communication, in a blog, every time you have a really important message you want to share, ask yourself, okay, what story can I tell to make that point more memorable? That's what people will remember. And it doesn't have to be an emotional story, or because sometimes when we talk about storytelling to business professionals, they think that they immediately associate it to emotional stuff.
Yeah.
And it could be, if it's relevant, if it's appropriate, but it doesn't have to be. It could be the story of it could be your own experience with something. It could be the experience that one of your clients had with something. It could be an example, a business anecdote. It could be a case study. These are all stories. But instead of the problem I see, especially with presentations, Tom, is that most business presentations are 99% facts and 1% story. I wouldn't say that we should turn this around, but it's a bit unbalanced. We should communicate more by telling stories. And that's how people can be more memorable.
I love that. I know I said I was going to make that the last point, but I just want to dive into something there about stories as well. I think one of the things I've noticed in people that make great storytellers online is they follow a very clear structure to that story that makes it compelling, right? It's like the same in kind of copywriting principles as well, is that the objective of each line of copy should be to get people to read the next line. Like you want to kind of keep hooking people. And do you have any tips around like how you can kind of structure a story to make it compelling?
Sure. That's a great question, because structure, especially when it comes to presentations, is so important. Here's the thing, so it's a great question, but it really depends on a number of things. Now, depending on your audience, depending on what they need, depending on what you're trying to achieve, then there are certain structures, certain storylines that work better than others. And the basic presentation structure is what I call a basic 3-act play. 3 acts. So this is true for presentations, also for films. If you think about it, any movie with a clear structure has 3 acts. Any presentation with a clear structure should have 3 acts. Act number 1 is the introduction. So you should have an interesting, a catchy introduction that catches people's attention. Then you need to have you need to develop your ideas. Maybe it could be 3 key ideas. It could be 3 key messages. People are not going to remember 100 things. What are the 3 things you want them to remember? And it could be maybe introduction, 3 key messages. Each message could be supported by a story, for example. And then you have a powerful conclusion with a call to action, making it very clear what was your point and why they should care about it. 3 acts: intro, some ideas, conclusion. And there are many other structures depending on the audience and the objective.
Love it. That's so awesome, Andrea. Thank you so much. I think this has been super valuable. So thank you for sharing those insights there. So finally, where can people get in touch with you, Andrea, if they want to kind of know more, if they want any coaching around delivering presentations?
Sure. Yeah, people can find us on our website, ideasonstage.com. They can find me on LinkedIn. Also, if people are interested, I'm running a number of free webinars. It's depending on when people are going to watch this, it's either face-to-face events in London or webinars for the time being. And these are free 1-hour sessions where I go deeper to talk about what it takes in order to prepare, design, and deliver effective presentations. When it comes to these events or webinars, if people just type my name, Andrea Pacini, on Eventbrite, they will find me, I hope.
Amazing. I'll link to the websites and to your LinkedIn and stuff in the description of the video.
Thank you.
Anyway. But Andrea, thank you so much. It's been amazing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Tom. All the best. Take care.
Thanks a lot.